Hi Year 10s, welcome to our second topic in our trimester for biology this year. For this topic we're going to be looking at ecosystems and we're also going to look a little bit at evolution. They're kind of combined in this topic. So this week is kind of going to be a little bit of revision from Year 9 ecosystems and a little bit of new content to help expand your current information that you retained from last year. So as we do in all our videos, here's a need to know. Now, it's quite a big need to know. I'm not going to go through these in the actual lesson itself, but if you'd like to pause the video and write these down so you can tick them off as you understand them, that would be a really good idea. Let's start by talking about the components of an ecosystem. What makes up the ecosystem? First off, I suppose we need to ask what actually is an ecosystem. Hopefully you remember from last year. But an ecosystem is basically defined as a community of independent organisms, or species, and the environment in which they interact. And each ecosystem will be made up of two sets of factors, abiotic factors and biotic factors. Now biotic, because bio meaning life, biotic factors are the living factors, so for example other animals in the ecosystem. And abiotic, remember any time in biology that you see an A or an and in front of a word, it means the opposite. So abiotic is non-living. So they're all the non-living factors, so it could be things like weather. We will, at this point, we'll watch a little video in class. Obviously, we can't play that on this video, but there will be a video that we show in class. Going a little bit further, now we've defined an ecosystem. Now let's define the word species. So there's a lot of scientific debate over exactly what is a species. And the best definition that we currently have in science is it's a group of organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring, so they can have children themselves. Now this brings up the question, so this picture over here shows something called a liger. Now the liger is the offspring of a lion and a tiger. Now lions and tigers are different species. They can breed together and they've created offspring, which is the liger. The liger itself is infertile. So the liger cannot breed and produce fertile offspring. So according to this definition, a liger does not exist as a species. It can't reproduce. Essential question. So, obviously, ligers are not too common in the wild, but in private or zoos, etc., there is occasionally ligers pop up. So, an ethical question or an essential question: should humans have the right to create new species? Why or why not? And we'll discuss this in class, but should we be able to create brand new species without thinking of consequences, etc.? Should we just be able to go, let's breed these two animals and see what we get? Should we be allowed to do that? Moving on, definitions of populations. So population, this is defined as a group of individuals of the same species who are in the same location at the same time. So for example here, we have a population of deer all together. Now the size of a population, that can be estimated by looking at the number of births and deaths in the population, but also looking at how many of the organisms or species in the population immigrate or emigrate from that population. And there's a formula. You don't look at it in year 10, but you will know that formula later on in life, or in year 11 and 12 if you do continue with biology studies. Continuing our definitions, habitats. This is defined as the environment in which a species usually lives. Most habitats are going to consist of soil, moisture, temperature, sunlight, food, and other organisms to help survive. Let's go a little bit further though. So we've got our key definitions. Now let's talk about some of those biotic and abiotic factors that are in an ecosystem. So a biotic factor of an ecosystem, like I said before, any living factor that can impact on the ecosystem. So any living organisms and the interactions those living organisms have. So we're talking about producers, consumers, decomposers. These are the types of organisms we see. Producers are the plants that are converting energy into matter. Consumers are the animals that are eating other organisms, and decomposers are organisms that are going to break down decaying organisms and recycle their nutrients. Between these three types of organisms, we have different interactions. So we have predation, when one organism will prey on another or hunt another organism for food. Herbivory, when one organism consumes a plant or a producer. Parasitism, when one organism will take nutrients from another organism of no benefit to the one that's losing nutrients. Mutualism, when two organisms of different species exist in a mutually beneficial relationship, so they're both getting something from the fact they're living with each other. Competition, organisms competing for a resource that is limited. Biotic facts, so these are non-living factors. So we're talking about things like temperature, where organisms have to have a set temperature which they can survive, and they'll only choose an ecosystem to live in that sustains that temperature. Sunlight, so there's enough sunlight for the plants in the ecosystem to photosynthesize. If there's no sunlight, the plants can't photosynthesize, they can't create energy. Without that, food is limited in the entire ecosystem and will probably not be replenishable. Water, all organisms need some sort of water to survive. So plants need it for photosynthesis, animals need it for many other life processes. pH, you have to have an optimum pH, otherwise organisms might not be able to survive in too acidic or too alkaline conditions. Same with salt, it can't be too salty, it can't have too little salt, because that controls how much water an organism has access to. So all of these are abiotic factors that we need to consider when we're looking at in ecosystems. Again, here's a little video that we will talk about in class and we'll watch in class, but obviously we can't show it on the YouTube page. Moving on, now we're going to focus purely on those ecosystem interactions. So we're starting with what's known as a niche. So a niche is the role that an organism plays in an environment as well as the position it holds. So a niche will look at all of the interactions an organism has with the abiotic and biotic environments and has access to, and can be broken down into two different types of niche. We have a fundamental niche, which is the set of conditions an animal can survive and reproduce in. So this is mainly just looking at abiotic factors. And then there's the realized niche, which is the actual conditions that the animal uses to survive and reproduce when we consider the interactions with other organisms. So for example, looking at an angry birds example here, we have three different types of birds, yellow, red, and blue. If we talk about their fundamental niche, well, they all live in the tree. The niche of these birds is the trees that they live in. Okay, so the conditions are they need that tree. But if we look at the realized niche, well, the yellow bird needs high regions, so it's only at the top of the tree. The red bird needs the middle of them, and the bluebird needs the small trunk and the lower branches. They have different realized niche, more specific realized niche when we look at the fact that each of them are competing for different spots and they take a different spot on that ecosystem or in that niche. Population size is also really important. We're talking about the rate at which populations grow or reduce in size. And this is determined by what's known as limiting factors. A limiting factor is abiotic factors which limit the growth of an ecosystem. So same organism may have different limiting factors based on the location of the ecosystem in the world. So for example, looking at population size of different countries, these are all humans, but they all have different limiting factors based on the country they live in, based on the space and the resources they have access to. And this can be looked at in what's called carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals a species can sustain in an ecosystem before there starts to be a decrease in population size. And it's determined by looking at the abiotic and the biotic factors. And we're looking at things like competition, abundance of food and water, weather patterns, all determining how many organisms can live in a certain ecosystem. Generally, what's going to happen when a population first starts to appear, you're going to have exponential growth where they're doubling rapidly, and we see this rapid growth. But then we reach the carrying capacity where beyond this line, there's not enough resources to sustain everyone that's in the ecosystem. So once we reach a certain point, we start to see a lack of growth and a decrease in population size because we physically can't sustain this many organisms. So we have a decrease. And then when we go back under the curve, it increases again, and we keep this curve continuing. So it starts, a population has an initial growth, and then it sees this almost S-shaped curve repeatedly at the carrying capacity. That's it for this video. So hopefully this is useful to you. I'll talk about it more in class. See you then.